Hello, Comics Alternative fans. Before we start with the episode, we want to invite all of you to check out our Patreon campaign.
That's right. Go to www.patreon.com/comicsalternative for more details. There you'll find more information about the campaign and the cool rewards levels we have.
For as little as $1 a month, you can help us maintain good quality comics talk, and the more you contribute, the more perks you get.
These include monthly podcast episodes exclusive to Patreon supporters, as well as the chance to help us choose which books we review on the show. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/comicsalternative and become one of our proud podcast patrons.
Yeah, and now on with the show.
This is the Comics Alternative, episode 148. A publisher's spotlight on Hang Dai Editions.
Countdown for blast off. X minus 5, 4, 3, 2, X minus 1, fire.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And for this episode, we're going to be looking at the recent releases from Hang Dai Editions. This is a publisher spotlight, one of the many we've been doing lately. But before we get to a discussion of those titles, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. In fact, many incredible specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price. Sometimes at 50% off cover price. But many times, the discounts are going to be more impressive than that.
Yep, and this month we've got one of those impressive discounts, the Vertigo bundle, 4 new Vertigo issues for 75% off.
Yow.
That's a big old ka-ching right there. They've also got Marvel Kids bundle, a DC Kids bundle, Marvel Secret Wars bundle, all kinds of Marvel and DC returning and newly debuting series bundles, even a Valiant bundle. So it's nothing but bundles everywhere you look.
Wow.
Everything else is pretty much 50% off except for that Vertigo, 75 big percent off this time.
Yes, it is a bundle wonderland at Discount Comic Book Service. And to find out about those and even more specials, go to their website, dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do pre-order your comics there, be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Indeed.
So, Gene, we have a really good show. We're going to be looking at the 3 new releases from Hang Dai Editions. And those titles are Beef with Tomato by Dean Haspiel, Smoke by Gregory Benton, and then finally Schmuck, written by Seth Kushner, with art by a variety of different artists. But, you know, before we get to our discussions, I want to play a brief conversation I had a little while ago with both Dean and Gregory. They basically told me a little context about Hang Dai Editions, how it sprung from their studio, what their plans had been, what their plans are now, and what they may have in store for the future. So let's hear what they had to say.
Sounds good.
I have the pleasure of talking with Gregory Benton and Dean Haspiel of Hang Dai Editions. Guys, how are you doing?
Good, Derek. Good to talk to you. Thanks for letting us be a part of this.
I'm doing great, Derek. Nice to meet you over the Skype phone.
Yeah, and I'm going to meet you guys in person, or at least Gregory with you a second time, next month in SPX. So I'm looking forward to that.
So are we. It's going to be hopefully a really fun show, and we get to debut our 3 fall books there.
Well, great segue into the first question that I have for you is, Gene and I are discussing the 3 Hang Dai Edition books, which is Schmuck, and Beef with Tomato. Great titles, all.
Thank you.
And are these now the 3 first official titles of Hang Dai Editions?
Well, we launched Hang Dai Editions in 2013. And we did that by self-publishing floppies or pamphlet-sized comic books, whatever you want to call them, mini-comics of sorts. And it was basically the idea was to have comic books that, create our own comics that we only made available to you from us. And it wasn't necessarily distributed because we didn't have a distribution deal. And it was also because, like, for instance, I work on a lot of franchise comics. Like recently I just worked on the Fox. And often I would do a show and someone would say, "Oh, I just got your latest comics. They're really great. Thank you very much." And I'm sitting there and, I love to shake hands and sign comics and appear, but I also want to sell stuff. And I don't necessarily create prints or, other kind of ancillary items. I love comic books and I love to write and draw stories. And I realized I had a bunch of my own stuff and I started to cobble them together and, create I guess the first thing I published was Psychotronic Comics, which was basically a one-man anthology that had autobio in it. It had a character called the Red Hook in it, and it had other characters. And then recently I published a Billy Dogma comic called Heart-Shaped Hole, and that was a 32-page magazine-sized comic. And then also as part of our studio imprint, Greg published some stuff, and Seth Kushner published some stuff, and Greg can tell you about what he did.
I did a few books. I was working on a longer graphic novel that didn't quite pan out, but the first section of it, called Force of Nature, I published as its own book. And then, every convention you'd like to have something new if it's possible. So we'd print up mini comics, and they'd all be under the Hang Dai banner.
You did Steak?
Yeah, Steak was one of them.
And then the smaller one.
What's this?
Pocketbook or something?
Oh yeah, Pocketbook, which is a book of sketches. But it's a great way to connect with people.
Yeah, and not necessarily every show. It's like we were thinking every 6 months or annually at least. So the first 2 years we were self-publishing under this umbrella title, Hang Dai Editions, which is honoring our studio, Hang Dai Studios, which is in Gowanus, Brooklyn, and we share that with other folks as well. And we just wanted to have, again, just stuff that you could only get from us. And between like the whole digital comics and web comics and I love comicsology and everything else, but I just wanted something you could only get from us, like this personal experience. I was getting frustrated by the fact that sure, you can get a lot of stuff that we make in other bookstores and even internationally sometimes, but I was missing that intimacy between me and the reader, and I wanted to create something that would bring that back.
So now these 3 books, the new ones that are about to come out in September, they're the first 3 that are going into a larger distribution. But you're saying that early on, beginning back in 2013, you guys were coming out with these books, but they were available only at various events, cons, and whatnot.
And some of those same books from the first 2 years are still only going to be made available from intimate parlays at shows. But we also want to make some money and get our stuff out there as well. We're not stupid. So we kind of decided,
speak for yourself.
We kind of decided if it's going to have a spine, it should probably be distributed, So the longer stories, the ones that we put more effort into, at least, in terms of page count, we wanted to have in bookstores. So we decided the best way to do that was to launch 3 books at the same time to kind of make a little bit of an impact, a little celebratory kind of dent into the comic book zeitgeist.
But the one thing actually that made that all possible was that we kind of been ruminating that idea, and Mark Arsenal at Alternative actually came to us and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this for some smaller publishers. Why don't we all get together and I'll distribute you through consortium, which is basically a dream come true, because they have a very far reach and they're very eager to deal with graphic novels and books." So it's a great fit.
Yeah, I mean that was really great of Mark to offer that to us, because even though we're like being cavalier as like writers and artists and trying to figure out how to be publishers and publicists as well, there's a lot of nuts and bolts that we don't know, and we're going to make a bunch of mistakes. So it was cool to have a guy that we know who's kind of a veteran in doing independent publishing be able to ally with us and be able to not only distribute our first 3 Hang Dai graphic novels, but he's actually also the publisher of Beef with Tomato. It's a Hang Dai production, but he's Alternative Comics is the publisher of Beef with Tomato.
But the other 2, Seth's and mine, are both Hang Dai Editions.
And actually, to speak to another thing that encouraged us was, the whole crowdfunding, the kickstarting kind of generation that we're diving into. Seth was the guy to kind of break that for us, because we've been talking about it and thinking about it and watching everybody else do it. And finally Seth said, all right, that's how I'm going to publish this book, Schmuck. And he was able to do that. And so it helped encourage us to think more broadly in those terms.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Seth, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little about, his tragic passing earlier this year,
right.
But also his role, as well as all of your roles in actually founding Hang Dai Editions. How did it come about?
I think because we shared a studio, that was one thing of how. And when did we form the studio? In 2011, would you say?
2011.
In 2011, we formed Hang Dai Studios, and we'd be sitting around. You read the comics news every day. You read this week's comics, and you talk about the pros and cons of not only the work but the industry. And I think after a while, we were getting fed up and frustrated by submitting pitches that never get read. Or, they do get read and it's 6 months later and then they give you a yes or no, or just the whole system after a while. And I've worked within the system for many, many, many years. So I know what it's like to deal with this stuff. I think you just get a little frustrated and you start to say, well, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. And I think after a lot of conversations and talking with Seth and Greg and whoever else was in the room at the time, you start to say, okay, well, how do we do this? We've seen other people do it. Why can't we do it? In fact, I've worked with other new upstarts that I felt, compromised by or the situation. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit. We're going to figure this out. So I think sitting with Seth, and he was such how do you describe Seth? He was very practical, encouraging, and mostly positive. About stuff. And so the fact that he was able to pick up the gauntlet that we had thrown down collectively and actually get Schmuck funded was the proof in the pudding in a way. In fact, just a few days ago, we saw pictures of Schmuck, printed with a spine and everything and ready for sale. So it's kind of a bittersweet moment for us now because Seth did pass away and because he never did get to see his book, come to fruition. But his wife and son are able to be a part of that. And they're actually going to come not to SPX, but to Baltimore Comic-Con the weekend after to help be part of this celebration of this book launch. And I don't know. It's really hard. It's kind of hard because I'm still trying to reconcile the fact that he isn't here because we think about him so much.
But it's beautiful though that his book is out.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I hope he's.
It's a testament of life in a way.
Yeah.
Even though it's called Schmuck.
All 3 of these books, Schmuck, Smoke, and Beef with Tomato, they all come out. I guess the release date is September 15th, correct?
That's the release date that we've been told.
No, that's it.
But that's yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And, we're having this conversation, and this podcast episode is going to be going up actually a little more than a month before the release of these titles. And one of the reasons why I think all of us wanted to do this episode early was to help spread the word about this, because many of our listeners may know about some of these titles, because I know that we've mentioned them on earlier episodes, particularly when we're going through the previews catalog. When those were solicited a couple of months ago, we definitely mentioned them. But they may have forgotten about that. So now, hearing about what Hang Dai Press is all about, and then hearing what Gene and I have to say about these titles, that I hope that'll stick in their heads, and they'll go, I want to seek these things out.
Oh, we're grateful. We're grateful. we hope you like the books. We're looking forward to what you guys have to say. And yeah, the whole point is to keep these, the names of these books and our press, Hang Dai Editions, out there for so it becomes something that's common to the ear, and hopefully that we'll be publishing certain images on a regular basis so that you get in tune with it. And yeah, early buzz is what it's all about, right? I mean, if your local comic shop didn't automatically order our books, maybe this podcast will help your listeners prompt their local comic shop to order this book, because you can still basically order it from Consortium and I think even Diamond.
Yeah, you can go to your independent bookstore and get it from there.
Independent bookstore,
local comic shop,
online, Amazon. You can and pre-order these books, and hopefully this podcast will help with that.
Well, I hope so. Now, with these three books coming out, you mentioned that one of the differences between these new releases and the earlier Hang Dai books is that these had a spine. In other words, kind of graphic novels, or what a lot of people would call graphic novels.
Sure.
Any other difference between the earlier Hang Dai material you guys were putting out to, let's say, a more limited audience, and now these three books, and also future titles that you're considering?
I don't know. What do you think?
I guess it's just. I think we're just taking ourselves a little bit more seriously.
Sure.
And we're trying to figure out. We're trying to use this as a learning experience to see how this works.
Yeah, I mean, like whenever we go to like a MoCA or an SPX or any of these independent shows, a lot of the auteurs and cartoonists tend to create stuff that's only available at those shows. So again, we were trying to create some material within the spirit of that, but at the same time, we want to make a living at this. So it is, the name of the game is distribution. So I just think it's like we're going to pick and choose what we feel is more kind of like be available for mass audiences, as it were. Even though these are these kooky personal signature works of ours. And then in terms of future books, well, I aim to do more Billy Dogma. If Beef with Tomato is well received, I may consider, sticking my foot back into the semi-autobiographical comics waters. And I have some other things in mind. And we do have some posthumous work that's possible to be produced of Seth Kushner's from his oeuvre, as it were, that was not produced yet, that we're thinking about putting together. And then Josh Neufeld, who is also part of the gang, is going to be coming out with new editions of The Vagabonds, which is his one-man anthology. And we're trying to encourage him to think about putting out something, via Spine and distributed. And then with Greg, what do you got coming up next?
I'm not exactly sure what I'll be doing next for Hang Dai Editions as far as a big book, but I'm certainly thinking about trying to do something every year and a half. Absolutely.
Greg has a lot of stuff that it's like short stories, and I'm trying to encourage him to put together a short story collection. And also, honestly, I like to write prose and essays and stuff, so I'm thinking about dabbling in that. I know that's not comics, but I could probably, provide illustrations to my prose, so I'm going to consider that as well. We also like to do salons and comics readings and performances. So this is another way to produce stuff that we can then sell at our performances. So we're not just thinking the comic shop or the comics industry. We're going to try and expand around that a little bit.
Maybe even, multimedia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. So now, Hang Dai Editions, they're going to be basically limited to those of you who are a part of the studio. Any plans on bringing other people, other creators from the outside into this press?
We definitely talk about that, and it's something that I'm inclined to think about doing, but I don't want to make the mistakes that I made with Activate, a webcomics collective I launched in 2006. We started with about 7 people, and within about 2 or 3 years had about 40 to 50 people, and it just got a little unwieldy. So we're trying to keep it limited to a group of like-minded individuals. And when I say like-minded, I don't mean in terms of story or the art that's produced, but with people who have the drive and determination to self-publish, because it's a hard thing to do, and we need to piggyback off each other's energy and commitment to publishing, or it doesn't work. So we do have some people in mind, but we also have to prove this to ourselves.
And I think this first part is a big hurdle. This is about figuring out if it actually can work, and we certainly hope it can.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can't see how it couldn't because they're 3 incredible books, and I think this is a great way of starting this new phase of Hang Dai Editions. So, Gregory and Dean, I want to thank you guys for taking the time and not only talking with me, but introducing our readers to Hang Dai Editions.
Well, thank you very much, and again, thank you and Gene for indulging our 3 books and talking about it today on this podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Appreciate it.
So, Gene, that was fun talking briefly with both Dean and Gregory, getting the lowdown on Hang Dai Editions.
Yeah, I wish I could have joined in on that. I just got home a little too late to join in on the fun.
Yeah, but, Dean and Greg said to say hello.
Thanks, guys.
So, hello. Yeah, and I'm going to see both of those guys next month at SPX, so I'm looking forward
to it. Oh, you're going?
Yeah.
I would love to go.
Yeah, I'm going. In fact, I'm going to be staying with Andy Wolverton because he lives right near there. I'm going to go and interview both Dean and Gregory in more detail about their own work, not just Hang Dai Editions.
Nice. I forget, is this your first SPX or have you been before?
I've never been. It'll be my first.
For a while, I was going all the time. I think I started with the second one, actually. I don't think I was at the first one, but I started with the second one. And for a while, when I was involved with the International Comic Arts Festival, or now the International Comic Arts Forum, for several years, we held that event in the same venue at the same time as SPX, at the hotel there in Bethesda. And so there was a lot of synergy going back and forth between the cartoonists from a lot of the alternative cartoonists from SPX and a lot of the international cartoonists that we would bring over, and we had a lot of nice cross-pollination going that way. That was a lot of fun, and I miss going to SPX. I think it was there 5 or 6 years in a row. I haven't been back since 2004 or 5 or something like that.
Well, I'll go there and have good enough time for both of us.
That sounds good.
Well, speaking of good times, do you want to go ahead and start talking about these new books?
Yeah, let's do it.
Now, we should mention that all 3 of the titles that we're discussing today, Beef with Tomato, Smoke, and Schmuck, they're all going to be released on September 15th. But as I was talking with Gregory and Dean earlier, we wanted to make sure to discuss the Hang Dai Editions early so that if people didn't already pre-order their copies of these books, they could actively begin to seek them out after listening to our review of them. So, if you can get it through your local comic shop, or you can pre-order through Amazon.com, among other places.
And like you said, probably our lovely sponsor probably will have them for sale at some point as well.
Yeah, I know that they were on pre-order a couple of months ago at DCB Service, and they're not up yet on in-stock trade, although once they're released, I'm pretty sure, at least I hope you can find them on in-stock trade. So if you don't get them right when they come out, then you can definitely get them soon after.
Or again at SPX if you happen to be lucky enough to be going there.
Exactly. In fact, one of those titles that is about to come out is Dean Haspiel's Beef with Tomato. Now, Gene, I know that you are friends with Dean. When did you first meet him?
Physically, I mean, in the flesh, I'm not exactly sure. It might have been at SPX, or no, it was probably before that. I'm not positive. But we first met on an email discussion list back when email discussion lists were the thing to do. In the mid-1990s. So I knew him back when he and Josh Neufeld were doing this little mimeographed or this little photocopied digest mini-comic called Keyhole, which had a lot of, which was kind of generally a two-person anthology of little experimental stories and sometimes longer stuff. And it was all very experimental. And I got to know both of them, but Dean especially over email. The way Dean writes in his comics is kind of the way he talks in real life, if you can believe that. He's got an amazing way with words as well as a way with ink. and his enthusiasm really jumped out from like the very first email that I ever read from him, and that enthusiasm really just carries through in the work that he does as well.
Well, I'm familiar with his work on Keyhole, maybe not as early as you were familiar with the mimeographed version, but I remember reading years ago some issues of Keyhole, and I also know him from his Billy Dogma stories, which I absolutely love. He illustrated Picar's The Quitter a number of years ago, and I really like the work that he did with Jonathan Ames, The Alcoholic. That was a good book.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun is maybe the wrong word to use, but
yeah. It was about a year and a half ago that you and I reviewed that very first issue of Haspiel's The Fox.
The Fox, right.
So yeah, Haspiel's someone who works indie, but he also works with some bigger publishers. So he I think of the three creators that we're discussing today, he's the one who has the widest audience.
In comics, at least, yeah. I think
in comics,
so.
Yes. And, if for those who are familiar with Dean's work on The Fox and, let's say, other larger publishers' comics, they may be a little bit surprised at Beef with Tomatoes because it definitely does have a different feel.
Right, yeah. This is not his Thing miniseries that he did back in the, I think, late 90s or early 2000s. Among the other things Dean can do, nobody draws the Thing except for Jack Kirby. Nobody can draw the Thing cooler than Dean Haspiel can. But yeah, this is a autobio memoir, kind of short story memoir collection. But you can see in every page, Dean's got 1 foot squarely in the alternative camp and 1 foot squarely in the mainstream camp, and his visual style kind of really is both of those things at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, if people want to wrap their brain or begin thinking about Beef with Tomato and the kind of stories that he's telling, if they're familiar with his earlier work, Opposable Thumbs, this seems to me, the follow-up to Opposable Thumbs, because those stories very similar to what we find in Beef with Tomato. And Beef with Tomato, the stories pick up about the same place where Opposable Thumbs leaves off, chronologically in terms of his life.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of these stories in Beef with Tomato. Now, would you call this an autobiography or a collection of stories that are autobiographical? How would you try to describe this to someone?
I would call it like a short story memoir in the short story format, because it's not trying to tell his whole biography. But at the same time, it's kind of giving you kind of through short stories, you kind of build up a picture of kind of where he is in his life right now. Because again, like most of these things, and we'll see this in Schmuck also, you're kind of looking back on history, on your own personal history, and kind of seeing how the different pieces of your life kind of fit together.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't call this an autobiography, but I would call this autobiographical stories. Now, I think, as we'll discuss later with Schmuck, Schmuck does this in a more overt way. They're autobiographical or autobiographically tinged stories of Seth Kushner, but they're mostly centered on one or two themes or key aspects of Kushner's life. And I think you can say somewhat the same thing about Beef with Tomato, although not in, as obvious a way. I'll tell you what I mean by this.
Go ahead.
In going back thank you, my friend. in going back and looking again at Opposable Thumbs, one of the things that stood out to me is a good number of these stories are all about him getting beat up, and not just physically, but also emotionally, about the number of whacks his body has taken, And he even mentions at one point in one of the stories in Opposable Thumb that, scars, he has no problem with scars because it adds character and it demonstrates that he's a person who's experience things. And so that was a theme that kept coming up in one form or another in Opposable Thumbs. In Beef with Tomatoes, one of the themes that stood out to me is, danger, but danger in a different way. In Opposable Thumbs is all the accidents that many times were self-induced, right? He would get drunk with friends and they do stupid shit, and then, he'd get his face cut up or break a bone or something would happen. With Beef with Tomato, many of these stories, you find him on his bike, and in fact, the cover image of the book is him on a bike flying up in the air, I think. Or maybe it's being hit. I'm not exactly sure which. But there's a lot of danger that goes on. And in fact, as you go through the book, you open the opening pages, and even in the table of contents, you see either him falling off of his bike or his bike being all bent up. And so that's the kind of danger that I saw coming out in a lot of these stories. Yeah, well,
it's kind of like... to me, it kind of feels like a metaphor, because life is kind of a series of collisions. Like you're not. It's kind of things kind of happen by accident. You're not always in control. And I think that's one thing that Beef with Tomato kind of shows you, is that no matter how much you try, like the world is bigger than you are, and there's always things that can possibly happen to you, and it's kind of a sort of rolling with the punches a little bit, and kind of trying to navigate your way through all this stuff.
I think that's a great way of putting it. And, it's not only that things are unpredictable for him, but also for other people, because there are several stories in this collection where you will find other people who have been damaged or fallen prey to fate or whatever it is you want to call it. And
right. Yeah.
One example is the short story Master Plan, where we see Dean at a basketball court, and then this really big guy comes over to pick up a basketball that has come toward Dean's feet, and then he realizes that this big guy is getting the ball for another person who's in a wheelchair right under the basket. And this guy has definitely been on the receiving end of hard knocks in a variety of forms. And so the guy in the wheelchair. And it's almost as if Dean here is experiencing, someone who has had it much worse than he has in some of these other stories of his.
Oh, right, yeah. And one thing I didn't want to give the impression that like the book is like the world against Dean or something like that. It's just kind of like Dean is kind of like our representative for how hard it is for anybody to get through the world. And yeah, you're right. It's not just the things that happen to him, but he experiences things that happen to other people as well. And again, just and that's very. Master Plan again. It's all about again trying to figure out that again that you said the boy in the wheelchair. He's clearly got a lot of like a motor skill problems and stuff like that. But it's clear that the big guy that Dean first kind of calls a Hulk. Basically, the Hulk's job is to work with the boy in the wheelchair until the boy can finally sink a basket, and that's kind of like this. This kind of like a heart-tugging thing. It looks like this looks like this big bruiser's coming at him, but really all the big bruiser wants to do is to help this poor guy make one basket. And it looks like it could be an all-afternoon job.
Exactly. But, there are also we've been talking about the danger and the fate aspect of some of these stories. There's some that are just really funny. And even quite charming in places. And I think this may be the title, I'm not exactly sure, Boy Loves Girl Hair, because this is also the name of the hair salon where he witnesses something.
Oh yeah, that's page 37.
Yes, and this is an interesting story where, in fact, both of the examples that I wanted to point out deal with voyeurism. And also exhibitionism at the same time. Because in Boy Loves Girl Hair, at one point, Dean says he wakes up and he hears these sounds, these moaning sounds, and he looks outside, and it's nighttime, and right across from his, second or third story window, he's looking down, and there's a couple sitting on a bench outside of this hair salon, called Boy Loves Girl Hair. And how shall I put this? The woman is being serviced orally.
Yeah, that's a very subtle way of saying it. Well, not really subtle at all, but
yeah,
it is what it is.
And he thought that was funny, and he ended up taking movies of it, for humor's sake. And then another one that I think is one of the great humor stories in this collection is The Beautiful Girl with Bolshevik Breasts.
Yep, but yeah, there's a good bit of voyeurism happening throughout the book, and yeah, this one is a definite one where again, you don't really want to give it away, but voyeurism can have serious health consequences.
Yeah, not so much for Dean, but for someone in another apartment. So yeah, those are some of the funnier stories in the collection. So there is a lighter side, of course, to Beef with Tomato. But I think that another thing that all of these stories have in common, and very similar to what we saw in Opposable Thumbs, this is definitely a New York or New York metropolitan area comic.
Oh, right, yeah, and it starts off with Dean coming to the conclusion that Manhattan he can't deal with Manhattan anymore, so he has to move. But again, he doesn't move away from New York. He just kind of moves out of Alphabet City. Right,
and he moves over to Brooklyn. So again, that's why I said the larger metropolitan area. So
right.
He's in the boroughs, in one of the boroughs, but. This is one of those books that I think if someone were completely ignorant of really deep urban living, the kind that you find in places like New York and Chicago, but especially New York, they may find some of this stuff maybe over the top. For instance, the closeness of the neighbors and the fact that, what we mentioned earlier, the voyeurism, the exhibitionism, the fact that people are in other people's lives. There's that one story where a neighbor of his just goes crazy one night after apparently or maybe killing someone. There are all of these dramatic things that go on in this very close intensity. And for those who do not live in urban areas like this, it may seem very foreign. But, I lived for a while in New York City, and things like this, maybe not this dramatically, are not unusual.
Yeah, but you might get the sense. I mean, what was the first? What was the first arc of the Fox called? Freak Magnet. Things just kind of happen around the Fox. Things just kind of happen around Dean, whether he wants them to or not. And again, it's because of, like you said, that kind of the very close urban setting. You kind of can't help it but have. There's a million stories in the Naked City.
Yeah, that's a great way of linking that to.
I just made that up. There's a million stories in the Naked City. I should trademark that.
Yeah. See if you can get an exclusive on that, my friend. What are one or two of the stories in this collection that really stood out to you?
Well, we already talked about Master Plan, which was one of my favorites, I think, just because it's that actually kind of tidies up or kind of symbolizes what Jonathan Ames says in his introduction. I just wanted to point to that. He says that. Let me see if I can find this here. Dean infuses each moment with a wonder and curiosity that is both hard-boiled and tender. And that kind of hard-boiled and tenderness together really kind of defines his storytelling, just kind of in general, but especially in his autobiographical stuff like this. But again, also the Billy Dogma stories that you talked about earlier. Billy Dogma was the last romantic anti-hero. It's all about this collection of this mix of hard-boiled, kind of semi-noir dialogue and kind of real tender, heartfelt, emotional stuff at the same time.
Yeah.
Even that the first story, Awful George, which has a lot of awfulness to it. Awful George apparently is a man who, is a guy who basically abused cats. It looks like, and there's this one panel on page where is it? On page 12, where people are thinking about what Awful George is like, and that drawing of Awful George on page 12 looks like that's like a superhero drawing dumped in the middle of a noir story, because Awful George is kind of drawn as like this force of nature, which really kind of looks like Will-O-the-Wisp from Spider-Man comics. And I wouldn't doubt at all if Dean actually had that in mind as he drew it. But if you can see that, it's this very kind of massive, 12? On page 12, yeah, that bottom panel, that massive figure walking through the street with people kind of recoiling back in horror, and the figure's made up almost entirely of these really delicate brushstrokes leading to these kind of big black masses of ink, this kind of wild hair. It's not meant to be representative of an actual person at all. It's more like Awful George is just this kind of force of nature that people just instinctively recoil from.
Right. And then, of course, right after that image, we get Dean telling us, a week later, my third bicycle of the year was stolen. So I think that's both a dramatic and humorous transition there.
Oh, right, and then how does that story end? We've got that last page is that page 13 there. The top panel. A week later, my third bicycle of the week was stolen.
And soon after, my girlfriend broke up with me, and I moved to Brooklyn.
Right, and that last panel with the kryptonite lock, my ass. In that last panel, suddenly we pull back from Dean holding the two pieces of broken bike chain, of broken chain from the bike. We pull out in classic 1960s Kirby Marvel Monster format to a panel of the Earth seen from space with a rocket ship with a speech balloon pointing down towards the Earth. So one person on the Earth is talking, but all we can see is the Earth and this kind of a Jack Kirby a starscape behind it with the words "my ass" in one big speech balloon out of it. That's clearly coming right from those 60s monster comics.
Yeah, well, another thing I thought of is, given the fact that he's holding a kryptonite lock in his hands, broken chains, and then we pull back to an image of the Earth and a spaceship rocketing toward it. Might that be Kal-El?
That spaceship sure as hell looks like the 60s version of Kal-El's rocket ship. Yeah.
But
and soon after my girlfriend broke up with me and I moved to Brooklyn, he's suddenly become a displaced person, just like young Kal-El.
Exactly.
I really think that is intentional.
Yeah.
And if it's not, he meant it, but he didn't realize he meant it.
Yeah. And if it wasn't, he can claim that it was intentional. Now that we've discussed that.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm sure it was.
One of my favorites. I've already mentioned a couple of them that deal with voyeurism and exhibitionism, but I think my favorite of the collection is the titular story, Beef with Tomato. And I like this for a number of reasons. I think this is one of the longest, it may be the longest story in the collection, which makes sense because it's the title piece.
Right.
And it goes from a specific historical event, which is, I guess, in, 2002 that they had the blackout in New York. It was after 9/11. So it begins with that, but then it leads into a little more meditative piece and a piece of reminiscence where Dean discusses what New York really means to him. Sometimes it all comes down to the mundane things. In fact, that's where the title of the story comes from. With him going into a particular Chinese restaurant, or maybe not Chinese restaurant. What kind of restaurant is it? It's Beef with Tomato. Oh, yeah, no, it is a Chinese. It's Wo Hop. Yeah, he mentions going into Wo Hop, and it's a place where his family used to go, and that even transitions into a memory of something that happened when he and his family was there at one point when he was a young kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just like the way that Dean uses a particular historical recent event and then from there transitions in a very seamless way from one event or remembrance to another. And then along the way, he tells us, and I'm looking specifically at page 58, he says, the city had lost a lot of his omniscient hum, and the eerie quiet contrasted with the pitter-patter of vandal feet sparked thoughts of mortality as I pondered by my premature demise. And then he says, a girl's ass. And we may wonder, what does he mean by a girl's ass? Then he explains, how do you think you're going to die? A question I'd never fully considered until today. And my first and only answer was a girl's ass. And then he explains, one day I'm going to be ripping my bike down down Union, and a fly girl is going to be walking down the street, and her ass is going to be doing that thing where it moves side to side and up and down, bouncing between heaven and hell. And it's going to have a soundtrack, Planet Rock by Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force. And then I'll be done, or it'll be done, just like that, and I'll be dead, crushed by a car I never saw coming. And this comment, this observation of a girl's ass and how that may lead to his demise comes back into the story later on. And I don't want to give anything away, but I think that the way that this story ends it was really the catcher for me. I mean, that's one of the things. I liked the story before, but then when I saw how Dean ends things on pages 64 and 65, I thought, okay, that's it. This is my favorite story of the collection.
Yeah, and it's not giving anything away, I think, to say that the story ends ambiguously.
Right.
But that ambiguity is set up a little bit, too, because we've got the appearance of Dean's third eye, which is a callback to something a few pages earlier in the story, where this is on page... check on the
61.
On the PDF here. On page 61, yeah. We got this little thing that suddenly there's this third eye that shows up in the middle of his forehead, much like Doctor Strange with the Eye of Agamotto. Can't not make those kind of references reading this book, even though it has nothing to do with superheroes. But at the bottom of the page, this is what you said, the story about when he was younger. There was that day I earned my third eye and learned to expect the unexpected in the Big Apple. And that again kind of goes back to we were talking about the theme of the book as well. Things are happening all over the place, and what you've got to do is to kind of learn how to recognize the situations that are around you, kind of to be mindful. And the whole point of the Girl's Ass story is that he would die if he were not mindful.
Right. And
so there's a lot of the book is trying to figure out how to be mindful in situations that are doing their best to try to kind of pull your attention in other directions.
So yeah, I really liked the way that... Well, I was about to say the way that the book proper ended, but I'm not exactly sure if that's the best way of putting it. Because if you look at the table of contents, the way that he lays out Beef with Tomato is, he tells us the introduction, and then we have a series of a number of stories. And then Beef of Tomatoes is the last of that series. And then after that, the rest of the book in the table of contents falls under the plus subheading. So you have, I'd rather be happy than write, which is a short work of prose.
Yeah, the second half of the book has a lot of prose.
Yes, and then we have, for instance, Bzz, which is the next comic, but it seems unfinished because it's a much rougher art. And so my guess is, and he doesn't explain this in any kind of introduction, but my guess is that the book proper, Beef with Tomato, are those earlier stories up until you get to the final title story. And then there are the other things. There are several works of short prose, other comics that either are at least look unfinished or don't seem to necessarily fit into the rest of the stories, although some of them could. And I'm wondering why he chose not to include those in the earlier section, or at least why he's including these comics. I mean, the prose, I think that's another issue. But the comics in this last section, why did he put those under the plus category? Why aren't they part of the book proper?
Well, part of it is that what you call the book proper. These are things that were originally published on on Zuda, I think, under a different title.
Yeah.
And this other stuff, the stuff that shows in the plus section, the text pieces and the other comics, I think were generally drawn for other venues. Like the 9/11 story, I believe, was in wasn't it in the Alternative or DC Comics anthology, the 9/11 anthology? I'm pretty sure. A lot of the Montero Bar and Grill was drawn for that. I think that was drawn when that bar actually closed. I remember when that was going on. I think a lot of those comics in that section were kind of drawn for other specific purposes, and this is a good place to kind of collect those kind of previously uncollected short stories, sort of. So you've kind of got the first half of the book is like a group of closely thematically tied short stories that kind of build their own little world, and there's other stuff that is still relevant because it's still part of Dean's life, but it doesn't fit that kind of overall narrative of the first half of the book.
Yeah, although again, I think that some of these stories in this last part of Beef with Tomatoes could easily and maybe even seamlessly, depending on how they were arranged, fit into, I guess, the newer material that we know of as Beef with Tomatoes. I mean, I think even though they had been published previously, they could still fit into, theme-wise, tone-wise, the earlier stories.
Yeah, although they're kind of a lot of them the even just graphically they are in a slightly different style as well.
That is where you're right. I think that the one place where these other stories that appear toward the end of the book, how they really stand out is visually. So for that reason, I guess I can see separating them into this what we can call the plus section along with the prose. But thematically, they fit for the most part right into what we were reading earlier.
Yeah, I think so, because again, I suppose part of it is because, life is life, and it's all being filtered through his sensibility as well. So they're going to, since they're about him, and he's telling them, they're going to seem like they could fit as well. But I can see why he would want to separate the things out like that, just to kind of keep the like with the like, keep the hot hot and the cool cool, to use the McDonald's metaphor. Where the hell is my brain?
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh, I think of all the comics in that back section, one of the things that really strikes me is, I think it's the final one, what you see is what you get. And not only does that stand out, not only visually, I mean, it's a very different, almost a more realistic, a finer kind of art. But it's the only story in this entire collection of the comics where it is nothing but, I guess we could call it a voiceover. There is no Dean. In fact, there are no people in this comic, and it's only 6 panels, so it's 1 page. But it's told because there are no people involved, and definitely there's no narrator, that we see Dean. This is a much more detached, and I think because of that, a little more philosophical comic.
Yeah, it's meditative. I think, if not exactly, I'm not sure I'd call it philosophical, but definitely meditative. And it's about kind of like what place can mean to you. And so it's all about environments, or you see the dog walking there in the 4th panel, things like that. But it's about like how your environment relates to you, and how you relate to your environment.
Right. It's also one of the most somber pieces in the collection.
Right. For
that reason. So yeah, whether the new material or whether the plus material, the older comics with the prose, I think this is a very good book, and if readers are familiar with Dean's work, with more mainstream comics such as The Fox, then I think they would do well to see another side of Dean Haspiel.
Right, and you get a few sides too, because you do get those kind of the prose only pieces as well, which at first almost felt like they were more fiction than memoir. I don't know, the first couple in particular kind of felt like I was wondering if he was playing a little faster and looser with the facts. It's kind of weird where I look at the comics as kind of more authentic than prose. But I mean, he clearly does say that this is all memoir, and some of them I can tell are more memoir than others. But it feels like sometimes the flights of fancy almost happen more when it's pure words than when he ties it down with the images as well. I don't know if that's real, but that's just kind of how I reacted to it. But it gives the book a really interesting texture as well, because the rhythm changes so much once you get into the second half.
Right, exactly. So, Gene, you want to move on to the next Hang Dai edition book we're going to be looking at?
Yeah, this is Greg Benton's Smoke.
Right. Now, had you known or read any of Benton's work before Smoke?
I have. I unfortunately have not read all of B plus F, kind of the last big book before this, or the previous big book before this. I've seen bits of it in different places, but I just haven't gotten around to reading the whole book yet. But everything that I've seen of stuff though is gorgeous. It's kind of wordless, kind of dream. Not exactly. They're not dream stories, but the narratives feel kind of dreamlike as you're moving through the kind of these symbol systems and kind of differing ways of rendering space and their characters as well. It's beautiful stuff, but this is the longest thing, I think, the longest sustained piece by him I've ever read.
Yeah. Now, I know that he's done work that has appeared in World War III.
Right.
Murder Can Be Fun. I know he was in that collection, 9/11 Emergency Relief. And I think next month, 1st/2nd, is going to be coming out with Fable Comics, and I think he has a piece in that as well. Now, I had read B plus F. I haven't yet, although I want to read Hummingbird, which came out in 1996 from Slave Labor Graphics, and so that's a really early work. But in B plus F, this came out early last year from Ad House, and this is, I'm holding it in my hand right now, a very big book.
That's one of the reasons I haven't had it yet, because the times I've had the opportunity to catch it, to get it, were times when I could not carry that book around with me.
Yeah, it's not so much heavy as it is large, and so This is one of those books, like, let's say, Gary Panter books. How the hell am I going to put this on my bookshelf?
Yeah, I actually have a tall enough ceiling in my living room that I actually can put some of those gigantic books on top of one of my tall bookshelves. But then other books like the Sunday Press comic strip collection books, those the bookshelf is actually the floor between two bookshelves, because some books are just too big for furniture to deal with.
Exactly. In fact, I'm looking up at the top of one of my bookshelves right here in my study, and I see the Wednesday Comics book, the Jimbo in Purgatory, and then Building Stories all together, because I don't know what else to do with them.
Right.
But yeah, the reason why I wanted to mention a little something about B plus F is it's very similar, and not just in terms of art style, to Smoke. Specifically, the character of, and I think it's called Zolo, and I get this from the summary that I found on Amazon. And it describes, the death dog.
The skeletal dog.
Yeah, that I guess is based on Xolotl, the Aztec god, I guess. But in the Amazon description, the dog is called Zolo. So,
right, yeah, like a Mexican hairless dog.
Yeah, of course, with the death mask. So that dog is a part of B plus F, and it's very similar, because just like Xolotl, this character is associated with the underworld. And in B plus F, you have a regular dog, in other words, not a death dog, and this woman, and they meet up and they form a relationship. And then they have, I guess, what you can call an underground experience where they go through certain trials, tribulations, hellacious experiences. And Zolo is a part of this. Now, I mention this because something quite similar goes on with Smoke. Because even on the very cover of the book, you have the Zolo figure and these two young boys that are either riding the dog or walking right next to it. Mm-hmm. And they have their own kind of underground experience, or death experience, if we want to call it that.
Right, yeah. This is going to be a little bit of a hard book to talk about, just because number one, it's wordless.
Right.
So that makes it a little more elliptical just in general, but also to describe a lot of the plot kind of gives away the pleasure in reading it for the first time. I'm a little hesitant to talk about what happens too much. If we talk about it, we need to talk about things like totally out of order and really hint at some things, because I don't want to spoil this for anybody, because it really is a book that kind of washes over you as you read it.
Exactly. And I agree with you. I think it's difficult to discuss, not so much because it's wordless, just like B plus F is wordless, but one, like you say, I don't want to spoil anything. We could easily give something away, even just briefly talking about some of the passages. But also, this is a very dreamlike book, so it's surreal
exactly.
in that sense. And there are moments when Benton transitions very seamlessly from, I guess, what we could call events going on in the real world with these two boys, these brothers, I guess, they're brothers, and then what they're experiencing elsewhere in another realm, where Zolo is a part of things, or at least he's participating in this. Mm-hmm. And so one at times serves as, I guess, an analogy to what's going on in the real world. So for instance, this almost dreamlike series of events, these surreal happenings that are taking place in this underworld realm, if that's what it is, kind of reflect in many ways and help to explain what may be going on with these two boys above ground, in the real world. And without giving anything away, I mean, this is the story of a couple of young boys who are they take a bus out to this field that they're harvesting tobacco.
Yeah, it's part of a migrant worker scenario.
Exactly. And in fact, the way that Amazon describes the book, it says, after an accident on an industrial farm unhinges two young brothers from reality, they are guided through a weird and wonderful journey by Zolo, the Aztecs' mythological protector of souls. Follow the brothers through a typical day from their arrival in an industrial tobacco farm, bust in with others early in the morning throughout their grueling chores, and ultimately to the accident that drops them into the realm of the Zolo. Okay? And then one other bit. Smoke is inspired by journalistic accounts of underage workers in the tobacco industry. These children often suffer neurological and physical effects from the exposure to the raw nicotine found in the plants they harvest, as well as from the hazardous conditions they endure to complete this hard labor. Now, I think that if you and I refrain from saying anything else about this book, that Amazon description, which is actually quite detailed, gives not a full sense of what smoke is all about, but I think it gives a good premise from which to interpret what goes on.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of gives you maybe too much. I'm not sure, but it is helpful if you look at this and you're completely confused by it all. Which again, it's easy to do if you try to go through it too fast. That's one of the interesting things about wordless comics. Sometimes people have a tendency, at least I do sometimes, on the first read, to go too quickly because there aren't those pesky words to slow you down. But the thing is, you've got to read the pictures. It's not just look at the pictures. You've got to read this stuff and try to figure out what's the grammar that's going on here. How does one picture relate to the other without the crutch of the words?
Exactly. And I had wondered when I saw this description on Amazon if, do I share this with our listeners or not? Is it giving away too much? And I don't think so. I think this gives a bare sketch that maybe functions as a foundation for the real book that we get in Smoke. And I think
right, exactly.
The real reading and the pleasure of reading through Smoke is to see how the visuals, as you put it, how they really tell the story. And that narrative is much more flexible and fluid. And there's so much to get through it. I mean, you're right. This is one of those books that you don't just flip through quickly just because you don't have words. I mean, you're looking for images that link themselves one to the other, from one panel to the next, from one part of the book to the next, but you're also looking for, iconic themes. So what are some of those images that keep popping up or cropping up, since we're talking about tobacco, cropping up again and again? I'm sorry, bad pun. And also, if you just limit yourself to just say one specific panel, and as big as Benton's pictures are, the panels can be quite large, and just beautiful to take in. I mean, you can just stare at one of his panels that is meticulously illustrated, and you can get lost for quite a while. And I think that's one of the joys, or the main joy of Smoke. Not necessarily trying to ferret out even a faint narrative line. The boys, migrant workers, tobacco farm, they have an experience. I mean, that I think is a very simple way of approaching this book. But when you're looking at the visuals, trying to see how all of the images and colors especially work together, because, just the colors of this book are just phenomenal.
Yeah, again, and we're looking at this, again, the book doesn't come out until mid-September. So we're reading these on as the PDF advanced reader's copies. And this looks beautiful on my iPad. I can't wait to see what these colors look like when they're actually on paper.
Yeah, because PDF tends to blunt images, colors.
Yeah, or like the screen glows in a different way than the ink is going to lay on the paper. Mm-hmm. And also, I'm not quite sure what the size of this book is. Also, because like you said, a lot of this book is one panel per page, or one or two panels per page, or sometimes one panel across two pages. So the scale of this is going to, I think, really influence or have an effect on how you read it as well.
Exactly. Yeah, in fact, as you were describing the way that Benton lays out his various panels, I just scrolled to, and I don't know what page this is in the book itself because there are no page numbers, but in my PDF it is page 35. And I should say that in the PDF, they're basically a 2-page spread is one PDF page.
Right.
So it's definitely not going to be page 35 in the finished book. But I'm looking at this 2-page spread of Zolo with the two boys in a field looking over to a group of people who are out in the distance. And, I mean, it's just beautiful the way that this is represented. And I can imagine if this is a larger format book. I mean, I can't wait to see this. I can't wait to get this book in my hands. But I can just imagine how consuming this image is going to be just to look at in person, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And, and one thing that we haven't mentioned a lot yet is the fact that, again, the book has kind of like these two different worlds in it, what we were calling, sort of, for lack of a better word, the real world. Which is done pretty much all on that's done digitally, but then when you move into the other world, this looks like it's painting, it's ink on paper instead. So it's a very different feel. So you get these transitions between one realm and the other, which are signaled by kind of symbolism, but also just kind of like by the marks on the page as well. In the PDF, page 32 is another one of those double page, a 2-page panel, which is another one of these kind of bizarre landscapes where I think those are giant chipmunks, but I'm not positive what's happening over there on the left.
On the left side, yeah, they do look like chipmunks.
Yeah, and just these amazing kind of a false, almost like false color imagery in the landscapes and stuff like that. It's just beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, page 34, that top, the top panel on 34 in the PDF, probably over on page 60 or so in the book. That top panel on the left where the boys and Zolo look like they're kind of like on a cliffside looking at. I don't know what's going on in the sky up there, but I like it.
Yeah, it looks like a completely different atmosphere with a different planet.
Yeah, sort of.
That they're looking off, yeah. And then we see them in this other realm. You know, we've been talking about this as being, another dimension, another realm, the underworld, or whatever.
Some sort of...
Someplace.
I think of it as an other reality.
And, yeah, I mean, it even has its own kind of Wizard of Oz feel to it, right? Because on that same 2-page spread that you were just alluding to, we see on the right-hand side, this larger panel, them walking through a grove of trees. And, of course, all the trees have faces, and they're looking down, either curiously or benevolently at Zolo and the two boys as they walk through.
Yeah, kind of like they kind of have almost like green giant hair and faces on their trunks and stuff like that. It becomes almost cute in a way that some of the book does not. I wouldn't use the word cute on a lot of these pages. These trees are actually kind of cute, and that kind of gives you that kind of Wizard of Oz feel. You're moving through even in the other world, there are different realms that you pass through.
Right. And again, I don't want to give anything away in what I'm about to say, but I think that some of these, as you put it, cute images, especially toward the end of the book, kind of work as a nice contrast to what seems, I say seem, to happen at the end or toward the end of this narrative.
You've got a lot of point counterpoint going along here through your different themes, through the different realms. Yeah, kind of like, not exactly mirror imagery, but sometimes it is a little mirror imagery where an image in one realm pops up in another realm in a slightly different fashion.
Yeah, and this is one of those. I mean, I wish I could talk a little bit more about the ending because I think that Benton does a great job at the way that he wraps things up. But again, I don't want to give anything away. Although I will say that the ending is nicely ambiguous. In some ways, similar to Beef with Tomato.
To a certain extent, yeah. I think this one's a little clearer than that, but still, he's you got to think about it a little bit, and that very last image really cuts. I think it really cuts two ways. And again, I can't say more about it, but
yeah,
the look on their faces in that last panel really kind of makes me go in two different places at the same time.
Yeah, we're a little hamstrung now because we can't really talk too much.
Buy the damn book and read it yourself.
Exactly. You got to, but again, I agree with you to a point that it's a little more definitive of an ending than the story Beef with Tomato. On the other hand, earlier in the story, there are some visual indicators that what I think probably may happen at the end actually may not happen, and given the fact that this story is so damn surreal, who's to know where the reality is?
Exactly.
Again, I think one of the benefits of Smoke.
Yeah, definitely.
And Benton's art in general. And in fact, if the only two things that you've read of Gregory Benton is Schmuck and B+F, you would think, okay, all the thing this guy does is wordless comics. But if you go to his website, he has a sampling of some of his comics that he's published elsewhere, and you will find words.
Oh yeah, he even acknowledged at the end of the book here. He one of the people he thanks is Peter Cooper for igniting the light of the wordless narrative. Right. So yeah, it's not a thing that he does all the time, but he's working it well, and he's got a lot to say with no words.
Right. So he's referring to the system here.
So, and a lot of other Cooper stuff is wordless as well. Mind's Eye, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, when I met Gregory at Heroes Con back in June, he had at his table this really nice backdrop. And the art on that was from, if it wasn't from B+F, then it was from Schmuck. I can't remember now that I'm trying to think about this, but the art is very similar because the style that we find in Schmuck is definitely the art that we see in B+F. But it was so prominent that you definitely noticed this at the table, almost to the point that his art was dwarfing him, which I think is a great effect for an artist.
Yeah, that's nice. I kick myself every day that I haven't made it to Heroes Con yet.
Well, I haven't made it to XPX, so we're even. So you want to move on to the third book that we're discussing?
Yeah, let's switch over to that now. Seth Kushner's Schmuck.
That's right, and I just love the title. And Kushner has written all of the stories in here, but it is illustrated by a variety of different artists. And in fact, two of the artists who illustrates these stories are two that we've already been discussing, Dean Haspiel and Gregory Benton. But there's a whole slew of others. Many names that I recognize, people like Nick Bertozzi, Josh Neufeld, Noah Van Sciver. But then there are others as well whose work I wasn't introduced to until I read Schmuck. So I think that that's a great way of organizing the stories in this collection.
And I'm with you. I know a lot of the names here, but certainly not all of them. There's a lot of names that were new here to me as well. And again, it's not just the names, it's the styles, because every artist really has their own individual style. I mean, we've got our main character, our Seth stand-in, is pretty much recognizable from story to story. But at the same time, everybody's drawing style is completely and utterly different, which gives us a really interesting feel. It's kind of there's more than a bit of a debt to, I think, to Picar's American Splendor, to have one person to have all these different stories with all these different artists filtered through one person's perspective and one person's point of view.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I was going to say this is a very Harvey Picar-esque collection, and I think it's no accident that one person who had a big hand in helping Seth put this together was Dean Haspiel, who worked quite closely with Picar.
Right, and Josh Neufeld had before him even.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is a collection of comic stories that have different visual feels, but I think thematically this is a very solid, cohesive collection because now we should say that the stories are autobiographical, although the character, the protagonist throughout Schmuck, is not Seth Kushner. It is Adam Kessler. But Adam Kessler is, for all practical purposes, the stand-in for Seth Kushner.
Right, a thinly veiled version of the author himself.
Right, and another way in which all of these stories are very tightly woven is they don't just deal with his life, but they deal with his life as it relates to women, or the lack thereof.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty much a story of a lonely man looking for love, or sometimes just a date. Sometimes even a date would be enough.
Yeah, and in fact, at first, I think I was into the fourth story when I started to notice that all the stories are about his relationships, because at first I think starting off I thought, okay, well, not all of them are going to be about relationship. There are other things going on there as well. So for instance, in the very first story that Gregory Benton illustrates, I Schmuck, I Schmeckle, it does begin with a reference to relationships, but then we get a flashback to when he was in Hebrew school. And then it ends with a relationship reference, but I really didn't see that first story as a relationship story, and it was only after I got into the third, fourth, and fifth story in this collection I thought, okay, I guess all of these stories are going to have that relationship theme to them, and all of them to a T until we get to the very end are definitely about relationships.
Right, yeah. Even that Hebrew school story, why is he not paying attention in Hebrew school? Because he's reading X-Men with Kitty Pryde.
Yeah, exactly. So let me ask you this. I mean, do you think that the theme of relationships, do you think that worked throughout this book? In other words, I guess maybe another way of asking this, if Kushner had interspersed stories about other aspects of his life, do you think that would have made this more or less cohesive of a collection?
Those are always hard questions.
Yeah,
the book sort of is what it is, but at the same time, why is he a schmuck? He's a schmuck because he can't deal with women. That's the overall focus of his schmuckiness. His interpersonal relationships, he gets along with dudes all right, even when it's kind of dude humor. But when it comes to relationships with women, when it comes to the dating scene, that's where he feels. That's where he feels or acts like a schmuck.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I think the only time we see him being a schmuck is as it relates to women. I'm thinking of another example of a schmuck whose narratives I absolutely enjoy, absolutely love, and that is Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm. Now, he's a schmuck, and not only because of his relationships, but for a variety of other reasons. But you're right, with Seth, or in this case the protagonist Adam, his schmuckiness is limited to the way that he relates or tries to relate to women. And I think that aspect of him is not always attractive, and I think purposely so. Now, he tells us toward the beginning of the book, Adam does at least, that this is something that the main schmuck is something that is, I guess, his mother called him a schmuck. Not necessarily in terms of his relationships, but that's basically what schmuck comes to mean as we go through this book, that it's about, the way that he relates to women, the way he idealizes them, the way that he kind of demeans them in a variety of different ways. And there are times in this book where I have to tell you, I don't necessarily like Adam.
Yeah,
and I don't think I'm supposed to, though.
No, I don't think you are either. This is we were talking before the show. It's kind of a warts and all portrayal of Adam's explorations of relationships, and with heavy emphasis on the warts. In one story, actually, literally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, warts around the genital regions.
Yeah, but this.
And that story is appropriately enough called The Burning.
Yeah, but it's filtered through, again, this very specific Adam stroke Seth sensibility, a very comics savvy, what am I say, comics obsessive sensibility as well. Again, from that very first story where he can't concentrate on Hebrew school because he's too busy thinking about Kitty Pryde and the X-Men. Our very first shot is him in the comic book store on Wednesday for New Comics Day. There are a lot of panels throughout the story, no matter who is drawing it, that are swipes from classic superhero comics as well. Those pop up quite a bit. He lets his nerd flag fly really proudly.
In fact, he even tries to use that to his advantage with some women.
True.
And at times it seems to work fairly well.
Occasionally.
Yeah. But, I mean, yeah, you're right. There are some instances where we see Adam, the protagonist, as someone that we could relate to. And then there are other instances where the way that he treats people and the way that he kind of objectifies women, by his own admission, is rather shallow, and you want to kind of distance yourself from that. And I'm thinking in particular of the story Size 11. This is a story where he meets someone, and in fact, this is someone that he, I think, finds online, and he meets with her first. Seems to go okay. Then he has another date with her, and he makes the comment that she seems a little pudgier than he remembered her, and he's turned off by that. And then when she at one point gets up to go to the bathroom or to see to something, and he's in her bedroom, he notices her clothes, and he looks to see what size it is, and he's surprised that it's, as the title suggests, size 11. And he doesn't like that. He holds that against her. It doesn't stop him from having sex with her, but, I mean, again, that shows us an unattractive side of this character. But I think we're supposed to see this unattractive side.
Yeah, it's we talked a little bit earlier about again, offline, as it were, about kind of the trajectory of the book itself, and how the book eventually ends in a much better place for him. But not just in terms of relationships, but also I think in terms of just how healthy he is as a person. I think it's one of those things where if you're gonna show somebody's growth, they have to start from being not as well developed as they are at the end. Mm-hmm. And we see a lot of struggle in this character going through trying to figure out what he's looking for in terms of relationship, when he actually is even thinking about relationship as opposed to just dating. The last quarter of the book, almost every story ends with kind of a mini epiphany. Okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to stop thinking about the past. I'm going to start looking towards the future. I'm going to start being more proactive about things. And you can see, I think it's about the last quarter of the book, and the character actually honestly, consciously trying to distance himself from the kinds of crap, the schmuckiness that he's been practicing over the course of this book, over the course of several years, and trying to come to terms with how to be a better person, how to be less of a schmuck, how to be less of a schmuck means how to deal more reasonably and more equitably with his relationships.
And empathically.
And empathically, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the progression, because I think one way of reading Schmuck is as a series of stories that, could easily stand on their own. In fact, every single one of these stories could stand on their own.
And did.
And he did, right. In fact, Seth does, at the end of the book in a section called Schmucky History. He tells us a little background about this project, that at first it started as a work of prose. And he wanted to, write his own story, especially as it relates to women and his relationships or his attempts at that. But then over time, he found that he wasn't as successful to get attention for that, and that he thought that, maybe he would find someone who could adapt some of these stories into comics form. And he published some of these for a while. I know one place that he said that he published them was on Dean's Activate Comics website. And so that helped him to get some buzz. But he went back through and collected all of these stories, put them all together in this collection. And so for this reason, I think if you look at the book as a whole, this is one of those that I wouldn't call an autobiography, as we were talking about Dean's Beef with Tomatoes. This, though, is a collection of stories that seem to hang, thematically especially, a little more solidly together. And for this reason, I'd be tempted to call it the comics equivalent of a short story cycle, or what I've called in a couple of places a graphic cycle. I mean, you definitely do see a progression. One story definitely leads to another, and in fact, some stories that come later in the collection reference things that happen earlier. You're dealing with a fictional character, but who is nonetheless based on a real-life character. Basically, Seth is Adam, and he even tells us as much in the history part. But at the same time, these individual stories could easily stand, and as you point out, did stand on their own elsewhere. Another example or a characteristic of a short story cycle, stories that can stand on their own, but together within the context of other stories in the collection have new and different meaning. And I think that's what we have here with Schmuck.
Yeah, right. Because we see we see characters reappear. We see similar situations reappear. And again, like I said, any story will stand on its own, but taken together, you kind of see him navigating his way through kind of the dating scene, and you see how similar scenarios can play out in different ways.
Exactly. And, earlier we made a reference to Picar's American Splendor. See, it's like American Splendor in many ways, but on the other hand, it's different because with American Splendor, there were many, many occasions where the stories were just moments from Picar's life that weren't necessarily connected one to the other outside of the fact that he experienced them.
Right. It's more curated, sort of.
Exactly. This is very, very different. This does have more of a narrative trajectory from beginning to end.
Right, yeah, and some of Harvey's work did do that as well, but Splendor starts off just kind of like here's another story, right. And again, and it's debt to, and he makes that debt to American Splendor explicit in one of the stories where he goes on a date to see the movie American Splendor.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And Harvey, and as he put it, Harvey helps get him laid once. Not Harvey himself, but the idea of Harvey Picar, which is an odd thing to think about, but it sort of worked for him once.
Right. Now, I'm tempted to ask you, and I guess I will since I said that I'm tempted to. I'm going to set that up. What are your favorite stories in this collection?
Oh, I hate those questions, man.
Or can you actually pinpoint one or two that really stand out to you for different reasons?
That is so hard. Just because there's I think there's about 24 stories in here altogether, and some of them pass by pretty quickly.
Yeah, they're 22 stories. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes very through. I cannot choose a favorite like that, just because even though they all again have a very a very kind of a obvious and a very distinctive style to themselves, it's all somewhat of a piece as well. I will say that the Double Date, starting on page 52, with art by Stephen DeStefano, is a fun story to. It's a hard story to read, but it's a fun story to look at. The art the artist style in this one is kind of different than anything else. It's kind of a cross between Gary Panther and Archie comics, with kind of day-glow colors.
Okay, yeah, I'll buy that.
And a little Scott Pilgrim thrown in there as well. Mm-hmm. But it's really fun to look at, but it's hard to read.
Yeah.
Because again, there's a lot of he's not the only schmuck in this story. His friend, trying to remember on people's names. His friend Daniel is just as schmucky, if not more so, than he is in the story.
Oh yeah,
but visually it's not. But again, so many of the stories stand out visually from each other, and that I suppose from some perspective that some people might see that as kind of a downfall, or might detract from it because it doesn't have the kind of a visual cohesiveness that the narrative actually gives us. But at the same time, I like it because it's kind of like this kaleidoscope. You're looking at the same things, the same people doing things from different perspectives. So the visual look of each story kind of is a new perspective on these characters and these situations as well at the same time. So yeah. I do like the visual variety. And again, the book there's so much variety as you go through it. Every story looks so different from every other one.
Oh yeah. And when I was asking you which ones kind of stand out to you, I have a few that kind of comes almost immediately to mind, and not so much because of the particular style, but I think visually the way that both Kushner and his particular artist that he's working with has chose to represent the story. Now, one of those stories comes early on. I think it's the second one: beer, boobs, and bowel movements.
Oh God!
I'm not one of those guys who really gets off on scatological humor, and so things like that. I know they never really sat well with me, so to speak. So the subject matter may not be one of my favorites, but I think that the way that the artist that worked with him on here, and that was Kevin Calder, the way that he uses colors to different effect, I think really did strike me from the beginning. So I really appreciate that. And then another story that stands out is the next one that follows, and Dean Haspiel did not all of the art, but part of the art. And the thing that makes this story stand out is the other artist in this story. This is on the couch, and that is Seth Kushner himself, because he was a photographer. And what they do, they begin the story with Dean's art, but then by the second page, and this is on 28 in the book, they immediately switch to Seth's photography. And so for several pages, it's his photography and the doctored or edited photography that ends up telling the visual story. And then, of course, as things wrap up on the very last page, 33, we're back with Dean's art.
Right, yeah. And that was actually the next story that I was going to mention if I was going to point out to something that was just kind of visually memorable. That one especially because, again, so much of that story is pure Seth.
Oh, exactly. So, I mean, there are others that really stood out to me as well. For instance, the one, Jew death, warning signs. I really like the way that warning signs was paneled. I think that really stood out to me.
Which one? I'm trying to remember which one that was. Oh, yeah, and that's drawn by Studs McKinley. There's another one where the color is really kind of bold in that one.
So yeah, I think that this is a fascinating collection on a variety of different levels and what it does. Now we haven't said anything about this yet, but Seth Kushner passed away back in May of this year. And I know that that's one of the things that both Dean and Gregory mentioned when I was talking to them. We heard that at the top of the show, where they're it's kind of bittersweet. On the one hand, they're glad that his project Schmuck is almost a reality. It's about to be released next month. At the same time, he's not around to actually see it. So
right, yeah, and that was I was Facebook friends with Seth. I met him a couple of times, but I couldn't say that I knew him at all. It wasn't actually what I would call like a real life friend. But I was following him on Facebook, and I saw when he was first diagnosed with leukemia, and to watch the kind of roller coaster of kind of miracles and setbacks that happen, which happen a lot to a lot of different people, but to see this kind of happen in real time was devastating, but also really inspiring to see how he kept his spirits going and how his work really helped to keep his spirit going as well. And I know how much this book meant to him as he was working on it, even before everything happened. But to have it actually come out, it is too bad that it's really too bad that he's not here to actually see the thing finally come to life this way.
Yeah. Now, this is interesting in that, and this is something else you and I were talking about off mic, so to speak, before we started to record this episode. You knew that Seth Kushner died as you were reading this book.
Right.
I didn't know that he had died until after I finished reading this. And then I found out only, after I finished, I didn't know that he was dead. And I'm wondering how my reading experience may have differed from yours because of my ignorance of the fact that he was dead. There is really nothing whatsoever in this book, like, for instance, no foreword or no note to the reader or anything like that tells us that Seth has passed on. And I'm wondering if that is a strategic move, because I'm wondering if, had I known of Kushner's death if I may have been tempted to read this last story in the collection, it's appropriately titled Journey's End. I'm wondering if I may have been tempted to read that a little more sentimentally.
That's interesting. I didn't catch it as sentimental. I was just kind of hoping that I was hoping it was ending where. I mean, I knew that he eventually was married and had a very happy marriage and had a son as well. So I knew that his life after this period got a hell of a lot better, and it made sense for the book to end here. And I was kind of struck also when I first read the book that it makes no mention of his passing, but at the same time, I believe the book was done before. I think everything was kind of set, was really kind of set together,
right?
Before he actually passed. So it makes sense to say, well, this is the book that he wanted to make. Let's put this book out there exactly as he planned it, because that's one of the Hang Dai things, right? They really kind of carefully curate their own stuff.
Right, exactly. No, I don't want to suggest that I read that last story, Journey's End, in a sentimental way. I didn't. I'm just wondering, had I known that he had died before I read this book, I may have been a little more predisposed toward the sentimental end of things.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't read that as... Now, I did read it as a happy ending, which, was nice. Especially given the fact that almost every other story in this collection kind of ended on a downer, depending on how you define downer, at least when it comes to relationships. But, yeah, and so I know that this is something that the guys at Hang Dai are, really, really cognizant of, is the kind of mixed feelings that are going to be generated around the release of this book next month.
Oh yeah, you can't help but there can't help but be like kind of extra emotions besides the fact of celebration that we've got a book out and finally it's out there, because all these books are a hell of a lot of work. I mean the Schmucky history at the end really tells you how long he worked on this and how many different forms until it finally reached the stage that we're reading, the stage that it seems like really is really what he was most happy with. Because again, like you said, he wanted it to be a novel at first. He even says that he thought he was writing the great American novel. It turned out not to be that at all. But to find a new way to kind of look at this stuff and, again, to kind of reflect back on your life. So as he's writing this, he's reflecting back on a period of his life. Because when he first wrote it, he was kind of writing it in the middle of things. And I lost my train of thought. Yeah. my train of thought just derailed there.
Yeah. No. I see where you're going. I mean, he, basically this is a project that evolved in the process of creation, taking on completely other forms.
Yeah, and I like that the two last images that we get are the cover of Schmuck #1, the actual comic book, but also their Seth and Tara's wedding announcement,
which Michael Fife illustrated.
Their wedding invitation. Yeah. Which, if you notice there, Seth and Tara, and if you look at that very first panel, we've got the two people behind the two of them. I'm thinking that the first one is like there's kind of like it's almost like the Seth's poor image of himself over his shoulder, but over Tara's shoulder is Tara from the Teen Titans also. Yeah. Which is, again, it shows you kind of the kind of comic stuff that's just kind of infused all the way throughout this book. For somebody who is known primarily as a photographer and a writer, you really see that comics has been in his blood, was in his blood the whole time, and this seems like the perfect way to tell this big chunk of his life story in this way.
Very moving story. And in fact, all the books that we discussed on this episode, the upcoming releases from Hang Dai Editions, all have been moving in their own way. We started off with a discussion of Dean Haspiel's Beef with Tomato. Then we moved on to Gregory Benton's Smoke. And we wrapped up our discussion with Seth Kushner's Schmuck. So we want to repeat again that all 3 of these books are going to be released in September on the 15th, I believe, is the pub date. So you can look forward to those. But we wanted to give you a little heads up ahead of time, a month ahead of time, on these books. So definitely look forward to these. Help spread the word and check out the guys at Hang Dai Studios and their new, or relatively new, the past couple of years, Hang Dai Edition Press. So great stuff. And if you want to find other great comics, then you only have a click away in your browser from finding them, and that's at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com. They'll do you right. No one does funny books better than DCB Service. Go there, order to your heart's delight. And after you do pre-order your comics there, get in touch and let us know what you're going to be reading, and also what kind of fascinating things we have to say about Hang Dai Editions. You can get in touch with us by going to the website, comicsalternative.com, and on the right-hand side of your browser, you'll find a tab that says Send Voicemail. Click on that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can leave us a message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's very simple and easy to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com. You can contact me directly at Derek@comicsalternative.com. And Gene, how can they get in touch with you?
Gene, Gene, @comicsalternative.com.
Ain't that cool? You can also find us on Twitter. We're at the number 2 guys with PhDs, and thank you to everyone who continues to retweet our tweets. You can also find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, on Google+, and on Pinterest. Hey, we even have a YouTube channel, so if you like to consume your media that way, you can listen to the Comics Alternative on YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's at comicsalternative.com. So
that's a whole lot of media.
That's a whole lot of media. We're all over the place. So we do want to hear from you. Get in touch with us. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene.
We'll see you later.
Take care.